Welcome to Future People, conversations with the change makers, impact makers, and the future shapers. Future People is a bold, future-focused podcast hosted by myself, Dan Moussa, founder of Thirdway Advisory. Join me for unfiltered conversations with the leaders who are rethinking value, legacy, and indeed their own leadership in a world that's being rebuilt, from our cities to our climate and our culture. These conversations are not to be missed. Good morning. Welcome to episode 2 of Future People, and today delighted to be joined by Debbie McNamara. Debbie is a seasoned leader in large-scale development known for bridging the gap and bringing together public and private sectors in the PPP format and shaping communities, which you've done in Australia and beyond. So welcome, Debbie, and
Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming in. And what is a very dreary, bleak morning in Brisbane. Not what we live in Brisbane for, is it?
Absolutely, but no, it's really good to be here. Thanks for the invite, Dan.
Awesome. So there's so much I want to get into today. So I think we definitely want to talk about your own career journey. I want to talk about PPPs and the role they play in projects here in Australia and for development. We can perhaps touch on some of the housing crisis and challenges we're having in Australia at the moment, because I know that's an area you've been involved in a lot. And then finally, we're going to jump in and discuss the future of leadership, the unknown, the next decade of this VUCA world we live in, and the challenges that our future leaders face, and how they can best prepare for those challenges. But well, I guess before that, Debbie, you've had such a varied journey and such a varied career. Maybe just take us through your own sort of career and the journey you've come on to get to where you are today.
Cool. Happy to share. So I'd say that I would characterise my journey as it wasn't the plan. So
the best ones.
Yeah, the best ones, exactly. So that's the first key, is just, follow the opportunities as they present. Started life in funds management, worked in that for about 4 years as a project manager, realised I didn't like it and didn't enjoy it. Ended up having an opportunity to go to the UK and to shift across as a project manager into the built environment. Found myself on my first construction site and I went, yes, this is the place I want to be. So reset, retrained, and then spent the next 15 years working in an integrated private sector real estate entity. And that was fantastic because that gave me the opportunity to work in construction and then work around all the disciplines that make up an integrated real estate entity. So I worked in project management, design, development, investment, fund management, and asset management. At that point, the GFC was hitting in the UK.
I remember it well. I got made redundant from Langer Rourke.
I also at that point had moved to Scotland and at that point had the opportunity to join a urban regeneration company. And that was my first step into working with quasi public-private entities. And again, that was the next time the lights went off and I went, yep, I found my space. So really using those private disciplines but working in a public construct, but working closely with the private sector. And that then started my journey in that PPP space. Went on and was the inaugural chief executive of an organisation called Hub West Scotland, so delivering social infrastructure for the west of Scotland. And then 9 years ago, returning back to Australia and taking on a role here with Metro North and leading a PPP project there, and then more recently heading up Economic Development Queensland. So characterised by what I love of the built environment, working in an environment where you're doing both, it's either public, private or a quasi entity that straddles both. I enjoy the climb, so it's either creating, growing, fixing, evolving something. I'm not a set and maintain kind of person. And I just love working with good cross-disciplinary people. So that's kind of the snapshot of the career.
What a great journey and what an amazing career. And, some of the projects you've been involved in, we can touch on those, and the leadership roles you've had are incredible. So it just shows for anyone out there, it can be done. And I think you made a really good point there about following opportunity and following people is often often the best thing to do rather than follow a set path. If you see an opportunity, you jump in and follow it. We'll have to jump back and ask that first construction site you found yourself on. Where was that, and what was it? Because I bet that brings back some
no, it was a very
interesting memories.
Very, very special project. It was in a chalk quarry in Kent. It was Blue Water, which was
the shopping centre.
The integrated retail and leisure experience. So
still standing, still
and
popular,
absolutely still going great guns. So an absolutely revolutionary project at the time. An incredibly talented group of people that were just from diverse backgrounds, but just had this incredible belief in what they were achieving, and just an incredibly amazing opportunity to learn on the ground from some really, really gifted leaders.
And I bet, obviously, as a young Australian female, probably a bit of a cultural difference to arriving on a building site in Kent.
Yeah, absolutely.
In England with the banter and I can only imagine the frolics and the un-PC-ness.
Yes, it was. It was the late 90s. There was probably at that time when I first got there was about 1,000 people on site, and there was about 10 women. And if anything, and it's interesting what tools you then get to in your tool belt that you get to deploy to work your way through and prosper in those kind of environments. And actually one of my strengths was actually my accent and coming from the bush. So being able to, just engage with people in a really authentic and genuine manner, and actually just treat people with respect and get on and build good relationships, and then work out through that how to get things done on site. So it was fantastic.
And isn't it funny though, like, because you probably look back with foresight, and hindsight is obviously a wonderful thing, but those experiences of like arriving in the UK, working in Kent, having the accent, being able to work with people, probably laid some like really, really good foundations for your success later on in your career, right? Because of those challenges and experiences.
Without a doubt, because that was the first construction site I'd ever worked on, and I wasn't trained. So my undergrad was in finance and economics. So it wasn't the formal learning that I had to then utilise to actually be capable or be successful in my role. It was all of those other skills. And very quickly what I learnt through my career was if you can lead and manage people and you can manage risk, you can apply those two disciplines across a whole raft of sectors. And there's a lot of nuances there, there's a lot of maturity there, and there's a lot of evolution there now. But those two fundamentals of people and risk have actually stayed with me for I won't say how many years now, but for quite a number of decades. So they do, they translate.
I've got a big smile on my face. I think just hearing you talking about being in that construction site for the first time, because I was, I worked as a procurement graduate at Lang O'Rourke up in Scotland, and we were on the Forth Valley Hospital project at the time. I think it was a 300,000 square foot. It's the biggest precast concrete substructure in Europe, and just the buzz of being a construction site as a young guy, like walking into the porter cabins. I mean, you can imagine it in between, just outside Glasgow. The banter was
brilliant,
prolific. Bacon and haggis rolls down the canteen every morning. Yeah, it just brings back incredible memories. It's a pretty special industry, and it's a special sector.
Without a doubt, we had a lot of Irish guys on site, and with a surname like McNamara, I was like, I was long forgotten family. So it was, and that banter and being able just to connect with people, and again, getting things done through people. So it was just, it really did set me up well for my career.
Maybe I say digress slightly, but it's interesting to talk about that, the banter and the culture piece, and that being so, I guess, crucial to success in the project. Is that something we're losing in the workspace, challenged by the work from home flexibility piece, which I understand is important, but I almost feel like people always don't feel they can't express themselves truly in the workplace as much anymore, and that, therefore, does that hamper the ability to create great cultures and high-performing teams?
Oh, look, without a doubt, and I know you and I talked a little bit before we got on online on air about what are some of the conversations we're going to have, and a fundamental one for me was around people, right? So you pose the question, how have projects evolved, these large-scale development, infrastructure development projects evolved over the last 20 or 30 years? Yes, they've become more sophisticated, whether it's technology, whether it's design, whether it's contracting frameworks, whether it's governance models, whether it's, risk allocation, whatever you want to talk technically. But at the end of the day, it's the people. And I do think that as we go forward, that human connection is even more paramount, that ability to work with people, to connect with people, to be able to just build, I know we use the language all the time, collegiate and strong and robust relationships, but truly actually connecting with people, because it is a team sport what we do. And I do think, I agree with you, I think we are losing that a little bit. And I think that it's easy to hide behind all of that sophistication now. And when it comes down to it, it is about getting things done through people. And so, yeah, it's absolutely a fundamental for me around future leaders, is having that ability to build connections through people.
That's for me really reassuring to hear and exciting as well, because you and I are massively aligned in that one. Let's jump into the world of PPP. So for private public projects, or is it public private projects, whichever
way you
right.
want.
Been around. I mean, in the UK for as long as I can remember, growing up and being involved in construction. I'm probably less educated on the history of PPPs in Australia and their sort of how long they've been around for. But there was a time, obviously, way back when you had public and private and the two would never meet. But maybe for people who aren't as familiar with PP projects, just a high-level overview of what a PPP project is. How they work, and perhaps, as I say, they've been around in the UK forever, but where are they being utilised in Australia currently?
Okay. So a PPP is public-private partnership. So, it does what it says on the tin. It brings the best of the public and private together. It utilises skills and capabilities, or resources, I should say. So resources and capabilities of the private sector that won't be as readily available to the public sector. So that's, that's unlocking financing, so bringing capital investment forward, so it gives government an alternative way of funding projects. It actually brings capability to the table, particularly, and usually it's deployed on really large, complex projects. So it brings capability, and it also usually brings longevity. So PPP projects could be 20, 25, 40 years. So it brings a mindset where you're not just creating the asset, but you're then maintaining the asset, operating the asset, and ensuring that asset can perform over that longer term. And then it's based on the private sector is then rewarded or paid on a performance basis. So the private sector is incentivised to ensure that that asset is always performing in line with the requirements of the public service. So it's a contracting framework that is evolved. It definitely has a depth of maturity in the UK that is less replicated in Australia. So the UK has been at it for longer, and therefore it's discovered, I suppose, some of the more challenges and some of the risks and some of the pitfalls, and it's then worked to refine that model in a way that delivers on the public outcomes, rewards the private sector for the investment and the risks that it takes, but makes sure that there's a more balanced way in which those risk and rewards equation is levelled up at the end. And I think that's probably some of the challenges of the kind of the first couple of decades, is that risk reward equation wasn't balancing as effectively as it could have in the UK.
And so, what has Australia as a nation now obviously utilising PPPs as well? Has it been able to learn from some of those challenges? And what are some of the major challenges that you've seen that we need to learn from to make successful PPPs?
So if I think about Australia, I mean, my experience of PPPs in Australia is limited to the health environment.
Yep.
So I've worked with them in a health context. They're adopted in a rail context in Australia, but that's not something that I have a lot of first-hand experience of. I think what I would say in Australia is it's a model that we seem to kind of dip our toe into and then pull back from, and it's almost like it's also got a political kind of overtone as well, which means that as a model, it hasn't got that depth of capability that the market understands, because we switch it on and then we seem to switch it off, and we don't. It's not a model that we then continually allow to mature and go forward. So health and education, different jurisdictions across Australia have dipped their toe in, pulled out again. So, Queensland's done that. In terms of health, a couple of our health projects were delivered through PPPs. We've now pulled back to a different contracting model. And there's reasons for that, and I understand that. And it's not a critique about that. I think it's more a critique to say, because we don't have this ongoing pipeline of PPPs, it doesn't allow us as readily to mature as both the private sector delivery entity and the public sector client to actually understand what does that mean and how do we optimise the outcomes of the PPP model. So if I look at the equivalent in Scotland really did commit to a PPP model, and that was what I was leading for 4 years in terms of Hub West Scotland, and through that, therefore, you mature as both the procuring public entity, working with your private shareholders and working with then your delivery partners. And they delivered and they developed up then a model that, as I said, it rebalanced that risk reward equation to make sure that it was, yes, the private partners were, if they performed, they were being adequately remunerated for that, and that was the returns they were achieving were on market, but they weren't experiencing things like super profit, which is where a lot of the pub test didn't work on PPPs because the initial assets were getting traded and super profits were being generated. That was never the intent. So it was about, so that maturity, the maturity in how you work with your partners. We talk a lot about collaborating contracts here. Again, it's a lot of talk, but as you culturally adapt to that and you work out how to make that work in practice, again, it needs the maturity and the lived experience on both the public and the private side. And I think that's where Australia doesn't have that widespread depth of experience.
I think that's often I've been in Australia for 4 years now, and I don't want it to be sort of critical is not the word, but I think that's maybe a challenge Australia has. You talk about developing that maturity, right? And not just in this space, but that's the whole piece of like dipping your toe in, dipping your toe out, and not really committing to a way or seeing something through for the long term. And I also think that Australia, and maybe it's something that's affecting this sector and the housing sector and the infrastructure as a whole, is just a lack of decision, like or people willing. Or people or bodies or organisations, I guess, really willing to make a decision, and perhaps it's a wrong decision down the line, but taking that sort of informed decision and taking action and making something happen. I can't feel that, having worked in these projects in the Middle East and Asia where it's fast moving and people are willing to make decisions and people and risk obviously become a part of that. But, as Australia, are we guilty of not giving things a proper opportunity to get them done? If that makes sense.
Look, there's a lot in that.
Yeah. That was more like a sort of verbal throw up than a question. Yeah, my own thoughts.
No, look, and I think the speed and the way in which we make decisions around large scale infrastructure projects like that. That's another discussion.
Yeah.
I think where I saw the UK moving to, and when I departed, where was moving away from individual project decisions to a program of decisions. And I think that would be my response to that, which is, and if you set up that program approach, it means that, yes, you've still got to take the next milestone decision, but you've already got that momentum. And we all know, having worked in the industry, momentum is key. You build the momentum and then it feeds more. So I think what I saw in the UK and what I experienced in Scotland was we'd really had shifted to a more program mentality, and therefore you're getting to learn and use all that additional capability that you're growing, all of those lessons that you are learning. It feeds each other. And so, yes, you're still making gateway decisions on investing in the next project, but you naturally are led to that point as opposed to having to start with a blank sheet of paper from
every
scratch.
time,
So I think the more we can shift to a program approach, I think there is more, there's inherent benefits.
Yeah, like you say, you retain that ongoing IP and the learnings, and it's it makes real sense. I think interesting just to dive a bit deeper into that experience you had in Hub West Scotland, and obviously that's would have been a pretty impactful project when you talk about, there's a lot of communities in the west of Scotland need some love and attention. What would you sort of say, and I want to dive back to that cultural piece and we'll get into future leadership, the sort of cultural ingredients that what would distinguish a successful PPP project, versus a perhaps a non-successful project or other model?
Yeah, and look, I won't reference, but I've experienced both really good and I've experienced less good, let's say.
Both learning opportunities.
Yeah, both
right?
learning opportunities, and you learn usually more in the less good good scenarios. I think and some of this is not rocket science, right? But when you go in to any PPP, that clarity of the what, when, the who, and the how, like they're just those simple questions that what is the outcome that you're both signing up to achieve? And again, it sounds really simple, But if you don't have absolute clarity of the what and what is that performance outcome that you're trying to get to, then that gives you problems. The who is doing it. So what's the roles and responsibilities of each of the parties? And again, I've been in scenarios where the who was not clearly that risk allocation, that who was accountable for which component, that wasn't fully resolved. And these things are incredibly complex assets, whether, it doesn't matter what the asset is, but usually when you're working in a PPP, you're delivering something of high complexity, there is a service overlay involved, and it's about, operational performance. So they're highly integrated assets, and having that absolute clarity, usually, preferably with the team that's then going to be responsible for the delivery. So gone are the days where we should be rolling in a bid team and then rolling in a delivery team, because that gets completely lost in translation.
And the two have never spoken.
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Who wrote this bid and how we're going to deliver this?
You've got responsibility for that. No, I don't.
Yeah, correct.
No, you can just see how it happens. So having that continuity, and hence goes back to my program approach. So if you have that continuity, you usually then have more continuity of people, being really clear, as I said, on allocation of responsibilities, accountability, risk, and then the what. So we've done the what, the who, the when, and the how. So it's going back to those really basic questions, and then yes, you'll end up with a contracting framework. But again, the reality is every project, because they are so complex, they're usually over a timeline that is going to have a couple of curveballs thrown at them. If they're lucky, it'll be half a dozen. If they're unlucky, it'll be more. And then how do you navigate through that? And that then comes down to relationship. Like we delivered, an incredibly wonderful outcome in terms of a new hospital outcome here in Brisbane during COVID. One of the most complex things you could possibly do through a PPP structure. And that became about relationship. Going back to first principles, understanding what we both expected of the outcome, what did we agree that we wanted that outcome to be. No, the contract didn't foresee a COVID. And I'm sure there was a load of projects that didn't foresee what a COVID was going to do to them. But you go back to those basic principles of what you signed up to, what's your role, what's your accountability, and then how do you navigate and work out a solution through what is in complete, wild curveball. And that's around the relationship fully. And that goes back to our point at the beginning, which is about people.
You mentioned COVID. I would love to be in a fly on the wall during some of those early, what would you call them, crisis
Yeah,
meetings,
my
right?
crisis management skills are very well honed.
Yeah, I mean, what an incredible, looking back, challenge you've gone through, right? I mean, at the time, probably horrific and sleepless nights, and no one had the textbook or the playbook, did they? Or
no, and for me, that was the first opportunity I'd ever had to work in delivering a tertiary health facility. I'd worked in primary health asset delivery, but never actually delivered and worked on a tertiary health facility within an integrated, health campus. Highly, highly complex, a service-led, talk about systems thinking, go work in health for a while, but if you have those really core capabilities, they are absolutely transferable.
It's amazing how much it comes back to people relationship communication. It was a really common thread there, and it's so important we don't lose that. And I do feel we are, like we touched on at the start, at risk of losing sight of that potentially. We sort of talked. You talked then about with PPPs, and we use Scotland as an example. I guess one of the great things about the PPP model is that longevity and the program side. But when you talked about also curveballs that can come into that. And I guess regardless of where you are in the world, one of that could be a change of government, right? Or a change of, like, how does that affect
coming out of the EU if you're sitting in the UK?
Correct. So how does that, does that become a real risk to a PPP or?
Yeah, look, it's, and I think it's one of the challenges that large scale infrastructure has is that it is over such a long-term duration. In an ideal world, it's depoliticised. And I know that is, that's not something that is, as easily said as done. But it's, really when we're talking about these types of infrastructure projects, they are, we talk about city shaping and, but they are, building new hospitals, building whatever it is, whether it's rail infrastructure, roads infrastructure, hospital education. So it's having... that it is disruptive when there is either a major change, whether it be a political change or whether, for the UK coming out of,
I think the UK is still feeling the effect.
Yeah,
feeling the effects of that now, aren't they?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so it is something that you need to think about, but it's something that you just need to navigate your way through. And yes, and it doesn't matter which colour of government you're going from and to, projects will get stopped. There'll be projects that do have that ongoing support, and it is disruptive. And the hard thing about our space in infrastructure is it's not easy to turn on. So when people then go, okay, let's turn that off, we actually want to turn something else back on or turn something on. It takes time. There is a lead time to what we do. And again, so that program mentality just gives you a little bit more certainty or less, just a bit more stability maybe rather than certainty, a bit more stability in riding some of the kind of bumpiness. But look, it's the reality of working in a democracy. We all love it, so they're good problems to have. But it is challenging for.
I suppose we're seeing that here. I mean, we're not going to talk about the Olympics today per se, but we started off with a Labour government. Now we've got the Liberals, and that could change again before the Olympics are delivered, right? So how do you? Yeah, like how do
you get someone else on to talk about that.
Yeah, I will. Don't worry, we're not going to. But yeah, that's it's an interesting. But it's like it's any infrastructure project, and that's one thing. I was speaking to someone recently. I spent lived in Saudi Arabia for 3 years, right? Pretty misunderstood country, a great place, and I'd say having we're lucky living in a free democratic society, which is we are massively grateful for, and there was sacrifice made for that. But the realities are of living in a kingdom, it's also got some real plus points, right? When decisions are made or projects need signed off, it's ultimately a smaller government or one or two people signing off, and the rate in which things get done and decisions are made are incredible. Like there's plus points to it, right?
No, absolutely. It's the characteristics of the environment you work in, and that longevity. I can absolutely see that commitment to that long-term outcome. It is a cleaner line. Than perhaps what we operate in sometimes.
Maybe less exciting, though, less challenging, which brings us on to the challenges of future leadership. Actually, I want to, just before we leave that PPP piece, because we're both sort of passionate about the housing crisis, right? And I'm going to call it a crisis in Australia housing, because you've been heavily involved in projects and community building, and I guess I've got involved in my own way by doing the CEO Sleep Out the last couple of years with Vinnie's, and it really uncovers the scale of a challenge, and it's right in front of people, and I don't think enough people are aware of it. Is there an opportunity, do you think, to really utilize that PPP model to try and help, I guess not combat, what's the word for it, try and help improve the housing situation in Australia, and get the houses that needed to be built, and get the communities that needed to be done sort of developed? Or are we sort of, is it that dipping toe in and out? It's not going to work. Like how do we solve? It's an impossible question. I'm not going to answer that. It's an impossible question. But what do you think are some learnings you've had from your career that you think actually this would be great to perhaps roll into the housing sector?
Look, I think so a few comments. I would say that the maturity of the discussion is definitely now there than where it was a few years ago.
Great.
Whereas I think that, it was almost very simple. Let's just release more land and everything's solved, right? So I think there's more understanding of the complexity of the housing system and the various levers that are available, both to public and private, to make a positive impact. There isn't one silver bullet, and I think we are now having that the discourse is around the various components to deliver a single healthy housing system. And then it becomes about enacting that. So how do you then translate that? So I think there's lots of, there's a range of different levers. You're right, I've had roles where I've had the ability to use some of those levers. But I think it for the housing system, and it's not just a problem that's unique to Australia.
Yeah, you can look
and so I think you're right though in that. I think one of the things that we probably don't tend to do enough is to have that outward-looking view and looking elsewhere and going, well, how are others dealing with it? And so I think there is absolute learnings coming that could come from other countries. But I think if I look at Australia, you've basically just got to attack it on all fronts, and whether that's around supply side or demand side, whether that's around physical enablement, whether that's, land regulation, infrastructure, construction, productivity, whether it's around financial levers, around, those big macro ones around interest rates, around, policy settings that support our, more disadvantaged people in our community, and around how we fund, social housing, how we fund homelessness. So there's a whole raft of different levers, but I think and there's also then that community piece around, well, I've got my lifestyle, I don't want that being impacted. So I think there's a shift in around how we think about housing as a human right, as opposed to housing as an investment asset. And I think that I also believe that housing is such a fundamental. So what we still don't do well here, I think, in Australia, is think about how we still think in our silos. So we think about education, we think about health, we think about social service delivery, we think about housing, but actually it's horizontal.
Yeah, it's community building,
it's community based. So and housing is a foundation to all of that. So without housing certainty and security, then all you're seeing is the product of that is then turning up in all of those other, contributing, not the direct, in single cause, but it is contributing to all of that. So that ability to see things more horizontally, and, that's for government as well, to actually then think about how do we solve this? Because yes, you might invest in housing, but actually the benefit might turn up in the health sector, in terms of, or in the education sector. And we just don't have the sophistication to think about that system in that entirety. We still think about it very horizontally. So I think it's about acknowledging that complexity, but then also, the things that the levers you have your hands on, trying to make sure that they are optimised to the point that you have responsibility for them.
Such a good point about that wider community piece, rather than just one single product being a house, because we all do go together. It's I loved hearing you mention as well that, does Australia sort of lack this sophistication? I know another thing we've spoken about and we've both been through is this. Whenever you go to an infrastructure summit in Australia, or you talk about the Olympics or wherever it is, the question comes up with talent, right? Who's going to do this? Who's going to lead it? Where are we getting the people from? And I always sit in the back of the room with a smile on my face, and I sometimes ask the question if I'm feeling brave, because the leaders, the politicians, whoever it is, say, look, it's cool, we'll just get into, there's a lot of talent international, we'll bring it into Australia with open arms. And I feel really privileged to work in the industry I work in terms of, recruitment and exec search and getting to support people in their careers. But I just get to meet the most amazing people. And I've worked with a lot of incredible Australians as well, who are coming back having delivered really complex infrastructure projects in really challenging locations where English might be the second and the third language, and they've done it successfully. And there's almost this barrier of entry and you're sort of laughing and smiling because I know you've been through it. There's a barrier of entry of getting back to Australia, and it's a real challenge for Australia, because I just don't get it. It's like, well, yeah, but they haven't, this person hasn't worked in local government in New South Wales, or they haven't, worked in with the Queensland government. I'm like, yeah, but they've had to go to a palace and present to a crown prince and a really demanding board in Arabic, or they've worked for
build a cultural link with something
Correct.
that is completely not their first kind of
correct,
their
or they've had to
point.
go and work in China, right? And again, and it's just we seem to have the blinkers on with international talent in Australia, and it worries me, because we can't get all the things we need to get done with it unless we bring in some of that incredible talent back to Australia. We have to attract it back, but we have to open our arms to international talent as well. I know you've been through that. I've got my views on it. I'll be quite open. I think people often feel threatened by the experience, right? I think a lot of people are thinking, rather than the mindset of being, well, actually, I want to be in a room and have everyone else around me in my team who's smarter, got different projects, got more experience, and build that really diverse team. I do believe there's still a bit of this person looks a bit better than me, potentially, could cause some dramas, might expose a few weaknesses. We'll just push it to one side. That's my own thoughts on it. What do you think the challenge to embracing this international experience is in Australia? Because it's something we need. We're going to have to do it, right?
Look, without a doubt, and you're right, it did happen for me. And I think when I came back 9 years ago, I think the big issue was that it was people couldn't translate what I had done, the roles that I had taken on, and they couldn't translate it because they didn't have a first-hand experience or understanding of it. So if you can translate things which are locally, based or Australia-based, or because you've got points of reference that make sense to you. And so, we're not that different, whether it's Victoria, WA, Queensland, New South Wales, like those points of reference, you have a framing that you can translate. That's probably the best way I can, I suppose, outline or share what then happened for me, because when I came back, they couldn't translate my experience that I was bringing to the table, and luckily I found somebody that could.
And that was one person, right?
Fabulous, know, but it was just, and I think, and particularly if you've never worked in the Middle East, if you've never worked in mainland Europe, like how do you help people translate that? So I think when we go then to, I talk about, core capabilities, because you can apply them in different settings, and particularly for people that have demonstrated the ability to apply those core capabilities in different settings. That in itself is another capability.
It's a super skill, right?
Absolutely. So I don't know if for me it wasn't about threat. It was more about they just didn't know where to put me.
Yeah.
They couldn't describe.
And it's too hard. It's too easy to say no.
You don't quite make sense. So I would hope that as the labour workforce is more mobile, we have more people that have spent time in their careers off, out of the country and overseas, that becomes less of a barrier. Because I think that outward facing, and I know I've mentioned it already, but that outward facing mindset is something that I think is fundamental to our future success. Like, we've got to stop thinking about ourselves at just a singular level. Yes, you need to act locally, and when you're looking at whatever you're doing in your role and the impact that has, locally, but you've got to think city, region, state, country, and then, country, region, Pacific, and then go out. And just even spending a bit of time thinking like that will change the way in which you then enact what you do locally. And for me, that's I think a benefit of having half my family on the other side of the world still, absolutely. Is it continually reminds me to get my head up. And I'll say that to myself when I go again. I'll go, overseas, I go, gosh, that's right, I've got my head down again. I've got to get my head up, because it just reframes how you think about when you then come back to solving your local issue. You're thinking about it in a different framing.
That's such good advice about getting your head up, taking things in, not walking around head down on your phone, or just concentrating about your small every days. Like, the world's in front of you, right? And there's so much learning there. So that's incredible advice, and something I'll be sure to take on board and make sure I do as well. We talked about future success here, so this is going to be a very, very exciting piece now about talking about the future of leadership. And I think you're in this really cool position at the moment because you're a leader. You've held senior leadership roles. You've got much more to give, and you will across the next decade. But part of that as well is going to be preparing the next generation of leaders, right? And we're going into let's take the next decade. There's always been challenges for every generation of human, right, across the world, whether it be geopolitical, whether it be industrial revolution, war. I'm not convinced there's been a time where there's been so much at once. We've got
so much change.
Climate change, we've got social change, geopolitical tensions, there's conflicts all across the world. And then we're living in this digitization age, which is happening at an unprecedented rate because basically it's an arms race to get to Gen AI first, right? So the skill sets, I think, of leadership are changing. Like, traditionally, being a financial acumen, being a strategic thinker, and being an industry expert, we're probably like, you're free. Like, that was great. You're going to be a fantastic leader or CEO. I think that's changing. So, like, really keen to get your thoughts on what the future leadership looks like. And I know, and you've correctly spoken about the need for relationships and people working together, and that cultural piece is, I couldn't agree more. That's so high on the list. It's really almost like number one these days. But What's your views on the future of leadership, and how do you navigate? Well, I guess the two questions: like, how do you navigate the next decade? Like, no one knows, but in your own thoughts, and then how do you see the role of, like, outstanding leaders like yourself, that role and almost the responsibility you have. Sorry to put the pressure on of developing that next generation of leaders who like, the world's going to be a completely different place in 10 years.
No, completely.
Heavy question, sorry.
No. So, look, I think we've touched on a couple of those themes already. For me, and it probably to sum it up and just reflecting what you've just said, you've got to be highly adaptable. Somebody that is, got their singular approach. I've done it this way. I'm always going to do it that way. Yeah, that's clearly not going to work anymore. So being very, very adaptable, being able to navigate and continue to make progress in complexity, because whether you're public, private, whether you're sitting where they come together, whether you're the community sector, wherever you are in that, we all work in highly complex environments now, and it's very easy to just continually get turned on yourself. So being adaptable, but being really having the skills and capability to know how to navigate a pathway through that to then make progress. And it doesn't matter if it's small progress, because small progress every day is progress. So I think that's probably the first one. Second one for me is then it's about values, right? So it goes back to, we've been talking about people, being genuine. I think particularly this next generation, they smell it off you if you aren't.
So true, isn't it?
No, and they call you on it. None of this respect your elders. Yeah. Like when I was on site, you only spoke when you got spoken
Correct.
to. That's not the case, and quite rightly, they will call you on it. So you need to be just authentic. Be who you are. Be genuine. Be a decent person. Kindness matters. Just be a genuine person. And if you lead from a place of good values, then people will forgive you when you make the wrong call, because guess what? We're all fallible and we will make 100%. The wrong call, but they will also then follow the direction that you want to go more readily. So just being a good, kind, genuine, authentic person. I mean, it sounds again so basic, but
it's so true.
It's so true.
And it's so lacking, isn't it?
Because good people attract good people. We all want to work with good people.
100%.
And I won't swear on the podcast, but
you can swear.
No, I know what my dad has a no dickheads policy, right? And that sits with me quite well. And then I think that we've talked about that systems thinking. So I don't think we need to repeat that, but having that, keep your head up, thinking about not just your task, because, you talk about automation and things, tasks and technical resolution is now going to happen, without us. So it's thinking about that interconnectivity. It's about how do those component parts come together to deliver something better or to unlock a bigger opportunity, or think about how your task is impacting that wider outcome. And we've talked about kind of for me, the best experience I've ever had in systems thinking was in the health service. And then probably the last thing for me is just continue to be curious. So I'm on the AI learning journey. It's blowing my mind.
It's scary, isn't it?
It's scary as anything, because I'm still trying to get my head around it, but you can't ignore it. So whatever it is at the time, you've got to just be curious enough to understand it.
Got to start adopting and playing and trying.
And trying, because if you lock it out, you will lock yourself out. And then leaning into what you need to. So rather than leaning into my colleagues that are of a similar vintage now, I'm calling my kids and going, right,
that's
how we, so just, and they're also helping me, I think probably the second part of your question, which is think about the future. So, I've got 3 children. The two younger ones are in uni at the moment, and they're thinking about their future. And I'll share the story of my daughter, who I absolutely love what she's doing, but she's doing a joint degree in law and fine arts, which you think that's a really weird combination.
Very traditional as well, isn't it?
But the fine arts is, I love it because it's all the creative thinking. It's the problem solving. It's the failing. It's the project work. It's working across disciplines. She's doing it and doing film. So those skills, I actually think, are more translatable
100%.
than when she gets out. The law, absolutely. But it's, I look at the learning she's doing, and it's still it's a very traditional way of learning to become a lawyer. Whereas I think the skills and capabilities that are going to set her up better are actually what she's getting through the creative discipline. And so...
And that breeds resilience too, doesn't it? The creative piece of trying again, like you
try
said.
again, resilience, failure. Oh my God, this has just blown up and I've got 24 hours to go. Yeah, what are you going to do? And that's the reality of, what we deal with. So it's, I think that, when as for my kids or for young people that I'm working with, get yourself to a point where you are opportune ready. Like as I started with, my career didn't follow this well-trodden, clearly mapped out. I was given an opportunity and I took it. And you've got those capabilities that I lent on to then optimize and maximize that opportunity in front of me. No, I didn't have the technical knowledge, but I could go get that because I know how to be curious. I know how to learn. I know how to build relationships. I'm pretty damn logical. I can actually navigate complexity. Off you go, right? You can, and I know that means, there's certain roles that are then, not that you can't do, but you can translate that to a lot of different environments.
Yeah, I mean, such sound advice there. And Debbie, this has been an awesome conversation.
Oh, thank you.
Generally, I'm for one, I think we should be rejoicing that you chose to came back to Australia 9 years ago because, we need more... having more individuals like yourself with that incredible experience, but passionate about leadership, so much to give, and I think, the next generation of leaders coming through behind you, if you're getting your mentorship and guidance, are in great hands. So, thanks so much for sharing your stories and your thoughts, and can't wait to keep following all your success into the future.
Look, appreciate it, and I'm just very humbled to be here and to be able to share it. So thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks, Debbie.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening and hope you enjoyed that episode of Future People. I've been your host, Daniel Moussa, and this has been brought to you by Thirdway Advisory. Please make sure you like, follow, share and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and I look forward to seeing you next week for another intellectual and engaging conversation.